The mortar round walked in 15 meters to the left, and put the whole patrol on the ground before the sound even caught up to it. Sofia Aguilar was face down in the gravel of the wadi with grit in her teeth and her ears ringing a single high note, when the machine gun opened up from the ridgeline and started chewing the rocks apart above her head. Through the ringing she heard Reyes scream her name, just once, and then she heard him stop screaming, and she lifted her head and saw 7 Marines down in the dry riverbed, and the senior corpsman lying 20 feet away with his aid bag still strapped to his back and not moving. The bird was 12 minutes out. She looked at her own 2 hands shaking in the dirt, and she knew, with a clarity that would never leave her, that everyone in that wash was going to live or die on the next 4 minutes, and there was nobody left to make the call but her. Now hold on. Hold on right there. I want you to freeze that. A 26-year-old corpsman, 2 years in the fleet, face down in a riverbed in Helmand province with rounds coming down the draw, and the only man who ever taught her how to do this job lying still in the dirt behind her. 7 men down in front of her. A medevac helicopter 12 minutes away. And 4 minutes, maybe less, before the math stops being a question and starts being a list of names. My name is Gunny Hargrove. 27 years in the Marine Corps, 14 of them running the Scout Sniper School at Quantico. I trained 800 shooters. I never trained a corpsman, and I'll tell you why that matters. A shooter takes 1 life at a time and carries it. A corpsman gets handed 7 at once and 4 minutes to decide which ones go home. That's not a job. That's a sentence handed to a kid who never asked to be the judge of anything. Her name is Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Sofia Aguilar, United States Navy, attached to 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. 6 men in this country are walking around right now because of what she did in the next 4 minutes. 1 is not. And 5 years later, standing at a podium in San Diego on Memorial Day, she still can't say his name out loud without the whole world going quiet. Sit down, friend. Pour yourself something. Let me tell you who she is, and let me tell you what 4 minutes really weighs when you're the one holding the watch. She grew up the third of 4 kids in a railroad town outside Bakersfield, California. Her mother cleaned a hospital on the night shift. Her father drove a refrigerated truck up and down the Central Valley, gone 4 and 5 days at a stretch, and Sofia used to wait up for him. She'd hear the air brakes hiss at the end of the street at 2 in the morning, and she'd already have the coffee going. She made that deal with herself when she was 9 years old. Somebody was always going to be awake when the people she loved came home. That's a small thing. Hold on to it. It comes back around. She joined the Navy at 19 because the recruiter who came to her high school was a corpsman, and he had a quiet way about him she trusted more than the loud men in the other uniforms. He told her the Corps doesn't hand you a rifle and tell you to win. They hand you a bag and tell you to bring people home. She signed that week. Her mother cried. Her father didn't say much, but he put his hand on the back of her neck the way he did when he was proud and couldn't find the words, and that was enough. By the spring of 2019, she had 2 years in the fleet and 1 deployment behind her, and she was the junior corpsman attached to a patrol element working the San Juan district of Helmand. The senior man was a corpsman named Marcus Reyes. 8 years in. Calm as still water. The kind of man who could start in 4 in a sandstorm and tell you a joke while he did it. He took one look at Sofia her first week and decided she was worth the trouble of teaching, and that decision was going to save 6 lives he'd never lived to count. Reyes drilled her with a stopwatch. He'd laid playing cards face down in the dirt, each one a wound he'd written on the back, and he'd flip them 3 and 4 at a time and click the watch and say one word. Sort. Who first? Who waits? Who you cover and come back to? Who you don't? He told her the worst day of her life would be the day there were more cards than seconds, and on that day, she did not get to be sad. On that day, she had to be right, and right was going to mean choosing, and choosing was going to mean leaving somebody. She used to argue with him about it. You don't leave anybody, she'd say. You work faster. And Reyes would just look at her with those patient eyes and flip another 3 cards and click the watch and say sort, because he knew something she didn't know yet. He knew that speed has a floor and a body has a clock, and someday those two things were going to meet in a place where all the wanting in the world wouldn't move the second hand. Now here's what most folks miss about a combat corpsman, and I want you to really sit with this before we go back into that wash. You picture somebody running through fire to a wounded man. That's true. That happens. That's the brave part everybody understands, the part they put in the movies. But the brave part isn't the hard part. The hard part comes after she reaches him. The hard part is standing over 3 men who are all going to die without her, when there is only one of her, and starting to count. Reyes called it the clock and the count. Every wound is a clock. A man bleeding from an arm, you've got minutes if you're quick. A man bleeding from where the leg joins the body, where no tourniquet reaches, he's got less time than you'd ever want to know. A man who isn't breathing has got exactly as long as it takes you to decide whether breathing for him is worth the 4 other men you are not touching while you do. And the worst card in the deck, the one Reyes made her flip 100 times until her hand stopped shaking when she saw it, was the man who's still warm and still looking at you, and the math says he's already gone. The kindest thing you can do for him is leave him, so the other 4 get their chance. Leave him with his eyes open. Leave him saying your name. That's the card nobody trains you to live with after. They train you to flip it. They don't train you to carry it. So now you know what was lying in the dirt behind Sofia Aguilar when that mortar walked in. Not just a friend. The only man within 500 miles who'd ever taught her how to do the thing she was about to have to do alone. The morning it happened was hot before the sun was even up. The patrol pushed out at 0500, 12 Marines, and the 2 corpsmen moving along the high ground above the dry wadi. It was the wrong kind of quiet, and Reyes felt it first. Sofia watched him slow his pace and reach back and touch the flap of his aid bag. Just touch it, the way a man touches a door he isn't sure he wants to open. No dogs. No farmers. No kids on the canal road that always had kids on it. The good ones always hear the quiet, friend. Hearing it just doesn't always save you. They were strung out along a goat trail above the wash when the first round came in. It was a near-perfect ambush, and I'll tell you as a man who studied them for a living, somebody on the other end had done this before. They dropped the mortar right on the center of the formation to put everybody down and scatter them, and the moment the Marines went to ground in the only cover there was, which was the wadi itself, the machine gun on the far ridge opened up on the wadi. They didn't ambush the trail. They ambushed the place the Marines would run to. They drove the patrol into a killing box, and then they started working it methodically, top to bottom, the way you'd water a garden. The squad leader, a sergeant named Doyle, took a round through the thigh in the first 10 seconds and went down hard. The Marine next to him, a kid named Okafor, caught fragmentation across the back and shoulders. 2 more went down in the scramble for cover, one with a chest wound that whistled, one with his lower leg opened up below the knee. A 5th man, a corporal named Briggs, got hit in the arm and kept fighting one-handed because that's what corporals do. And Reyes, who came up out of his crouch and started moving toward the wounded before the dust had even settled, because that's what corpsmen do, took a round high in the chest and went down between two boulders and did not get up. That was the scream Sofia heard. That was the scream that stopped. She low-crawled to him first. Of course she did. You go to your own. She got to Reyes and rolled him toward her, and saw where the round had gone in, high on the left, and she saw the pink froth at his lips, and she saw his eyes find hers. He was still in there. He looked at her, and he did the thing she would spend the rest of her life unable to forgive him for and unable to thank him enough for in the same breath. He moved his eyes off of her, down the wash, toward the others, toward the 7 men screaming in the gravel. He moved his eyes off himself and onto them, and he held her gaze for one more second to make sure she understood, and what he was telling her was sort. He was a chest wound with a froth at the lips and a bird 12 minutes out. By his own count, by the count he had drilled into her with a stopwatch and a deck of cards in the dirt, he was a card she had to set down. And he made her flip him face up himself, with his own eyes, so she wouldn't have to wonder later whether she'd read it wrong. I have been doing this a long time, friend, and I have heard a lot of stories about a lot of brave things, and I am telling you, I have never heard of anything braver than a dying man spending the last clear seconds he will ever have making sure the person who could save him understands that she has to go save somebody else. Sofia put her hand flat on Marcus Reyes's chest for exactly 1 second. Then she took it off, and she started to count. 12 minutes on the bird. Call it 11 now. She had heard the radio man, Lance Corporal Petty, screaming the 9 line into the handset from behind a rock, his voice cracking on the grid coordinates, and she had heard the answer come back, and the answer was 12 mics, and 12 minutes is a number that means nothing in a kitchen and everything in a wash. 11 now. She did the only honest math there was. 11 minutes from now a helicopter would touch down and start taking people. Between now and then, everyone who was still alive when it landed would fly. Everyone who wasn't, wouldn't. Her job was not to save 7 men. Her job was to decide which men were still going to be alive in 11 minutes, and spend every second she had making the number as high as it could go. So she counted them where they lay, screaming, in the order she could see them. Doyle, the squad leader, thy wound, bleeding bad but high enough that a tourniquet would reach it. Card up. Salvageable. Fast. Okafor, fragmentation across the back, ugly, screaming, but the blood was a seep and not a pump and his airway was clear. Card up. Salvageable. He could wait. The whistling chest, a private named Hutchins. Air going where air shouldn't go. He had minutes if she sealed it, and minutes more if she didn't, and the difference between those two numbers was a decision she could make in 15 seconds with a piece of plastic and the heel of her hand. Card up. Salvageable. Worth the 15 seconds. The lower leg below the knee opened up and pouring. A lance corporal named Ruiz. Tourniquet country, low and clean, the easiest hard wound there is. Card up. Salvageable. Fast. Briggs, the corporal, still fighting one-handed, arm hit but on his feet. Card up. He could wait the longest of any of them, because he was treating himself by refusing to fall down. God love a corporal. That's 5 she could save. Then there was Reyes, behind her, eyes still open, card already face up. Already set down. Already gone by his own count. And then there was the 7th man. The seventh man was Lance Corporal Thomas Riggs, 19 years old, from Dayton, Ohio, and Sophia almost didn't see him because he wasn't screaming. The ones who scream are telling you they're still in the fight for their own lives. The quiet ones are the ones that stop your heart. Riggs was down in the lowest part of the wash, half under the lip of the bank, and he had taken a round through the pelvis, up high, into the place where the big artery runs down into the leg, the place Reyes used to tap on the card and say no tourniquet reaches here. This is the one you can't tie off. This is the one that fights you for an hour and wins. Riggs wasn't screaming because Riggs was already going gray. He was looking up at the white sky with that calm that isn't calm. That's the body deciding to stop spending energy on panic, because it's got more important accounting to do. By the count, by the clock, by everything Marcus Reyes had drilled into her hands, with a stopwatch in the dirt, Thomas Riggs was the hardest card in the deck. Junctional hemorrhage, they call it. The bleed you can't reach. To save Riggs, she would have to get down in that low ground in the open, under the gun, and pack the wound and hold pressure with her whole body weight, and not for 30 seconds. 4 minutes. For all 11 of them, maybe, and even then the odds were against her, because that bleed is the one that beats trained surgeons in a clean operating room with blood hanging on a pole. If she went to Riggs first, and stayed on Riggs, she would save Riggs. Maybe. And while she was face down in the open holding pressure on one 19-year-old's pelvis, Doyle would bleed out from a thigh she could have tied off in 20 seconds. Hutchins would suffocate behind a seal she never placed. Ruiz would empty out from a leg that wanted nothing from her but a strap and a hard pull. She would spend 11 minutes maybe saving one man, and certainly losing 3 others she could have saved in the time it took to walk past him. That was the math. That was the whole brutal sentence of it, laid out in a dry riverbed with a machine gun looking for the next thing to kill. Save the one who's hardest and probably lose him anyway, and definitely lose 3. Or walk past the quiet boy looking at the sky, and save the 4 who are screaming, and let the math be the thing that killed him instead of the bullet. Sofia Aguilar was 26 years old. She had 2 years in the fleet. And she made the call her teacher had made with his own eyes 30 seconds before. The call nobody on God's earth should ever have to make. And she made it right. And making it right is the thing that broke something in her that has never fully healed. She left Thomas Riggs. She crawled to Doyle first because he was closest and fastest, and she ran the tourniquet high on his thigh and cranked the windlass until he howled and the bright pump stopped, and that howl was a good sound. That howl meant alive. And she clipped it and slapped his cheek and said, "You're going home," and she was already moving. 20 seconds. She low-crawled to Ruiz with the round cracking off the rocks above her, and she got a tourniquet on that lower leg, high and tight, and pulled until it bit, and that one stopped too, and she said, "You're going home, Ruiz," and she meant it, and she was already moving. 40 seconds. She got to Hutchins and his chest was sucking air through the wrong door, and she tore the wrapper off a chest seal with her teeth and wiped the blood off his skin with her own forearm and pressed the seal down and felt it grab. And his next breath went where breath was supposed to go, and his eyes came back up out of that great place a little, and she said, "Breathe, you're going home." And she was already moving. A minute, maybe 90 seconds. 3 saved. And every single time she crawled from one man to the next, her path took her within reach of Thomas Riggs, and every single time she did not stop, and every single time he watched her come and watched her go, and he never once asked her to stay, because somewhere in that fading 19-year-old kid was enough Marine to understand what was happening. And he gave her the one mercy he had left to give. He didn't beg. He just watched her work and let her go. I want to stop right here, friend. I want you to sit with that for a second. There is a kind of courage that gets medals, and it's real, and I've stood next to men who had it, and I'd stand next to them again. The courage to run at the gun. The courage to pull a man out. That's the courage we know how to honor because we know how to look at it. And then there's the other kind. The kind nobody pins a ribbon on because nobody can stand to look at it straight. The courage of a 19-year-old boy bleeding out in the open, who watches the only person who could save him choose 3 other men over and over 4 feet from his face, and who decides in the last clear minutes of his life not to make it harder for her. Not to scream her name and pull her down into a fight they both lose. To just let her go do the math and die quiet so the living could fly. We don't have a medal for that. We should. We don't. She finished her sort. Briggs the corporal she got to last because he was still standing and still shooting, and she tied his arm off between magazines, and he nodded at her and kept firing, and Okafor she packed and rolled and told to hold still, and the whole time the Count ran in her head like a second heartbeat. The Count Reyes built into her. And the Count said you did it right, and the rest of her said you left him, and both of those things were true at the same time, and have been true every day since. The bird came in at 11 minutes and some seconds, flaring into the wash in a hurricane of grit, and the crew chief and the Marines who could still move started loading the wounded, and there is a hierarchy to that too, the worst first, and Sophia ran it from her knees, calling it out, Hutchins first, then Doyle, then Ruiz, Okafor can sit up, Briggs walks. And they ran them onto the bird in the order her Count had built. 5 men alive, who would not have been alive if she had chosen with her heart instead of her training. And then she crawled back in the rotor wash, to the lowest part of the wash, to Thomas Riggs. He was still there. He was still looking at the sky. He had maybe a minute left in him, and they both knew it, and the helicopter was screaming behind her telling her there was no time for this. And she got down in the dirt next to that boy from Dayton, and she did the only thing left that she could do. She didn't lie to him. That was the gift she gave him, and it cost her, because the easy thing, the human thing, is to say you're going to make it. Hang on. She didn't. She got her face down close to his, and she put her bloody hand against his cheek the way her own father used to put his hand on the back of her neck, and she told him the truth, which was that he was not alone, and that somebody was awake with him, and that he had done it right, and that she had him. Riggs looked at her. And here is the part she has never told anyone, the part she was about to tell 1,000 strangers in San Diego 5 years later, because she couldn't carry it by herself one more Memorial Day. With the last of what he had, that 19-year-old kid moved his cracked lips, and what he said was not a prayer, and was not his mother's name. What he said, looking up at the corpsman who had had to walk past him 4 times to save 4 other men, was thank you. He thanked her. For staying now. For the truth. For the hand on his face. For not lying to him about the math he could feel running out in his own body. Sofia Aguilar stayed with him until the count was over. Then she picked his body up herself, because she would not let him be dragged, and she carried Thomas Riggs to the helicopter so he would not be left in the wash, and she carried Marcus Reyes too, and she got both of her dead aboard with her 5 living, and she climbed on last. And the bird lifted out of that killing box, and she sat on the deck with her back against the bulkhead and her hands shaking, and a boy's blood drying to her wrists, and she did not cry. There were still men to keep alive on that flight. On that day, Reyes had told her, "You don't get to be sad." On that day, you have to be right. She was right. 6 families got their boy back. Doyle, Rees, Hutchins, Okafor, Briggs, all home, all alive today. And 1 family in Dayton, Ohio got a folded flag and a story that stopped at the edge of the wash, because the official report had no language for what really happened down in that low ground, and the official report is where the trouble started. But that's the next part. Pour yourself something, friend. We're not done. Now here's where the story should have ended clean, with 6 men home and a hero who never asked to be one, and instead it's where the real fight started, because the report that came out of that wash didn't have a single word in it about Sofia Aguilar making a choice. The after-action lumped it all together the way these things get lumped: enemy contact, casualties sustained, corpsman rendered aid, 1 Marine and 1 corpsman killed in action. Clean. Bloodless. True in the way a tombstone is true and false in every way that mattered. It said she rendered aid. It did not say she stood in a killing box and sorted 7 men with her bare hands. It did not say she walked past a dying boy 4 times because the math told her to. It did not say Thomas Riggs gave his own life away quiet so the others could fly. And because the report said so little, a story grew up in the empty space, the way stories always do, and the story that grew up was the wrong one. Somebody in the chain, looking at the casualty numbers and not at the truth, started asking a question that should never have been asked. Why did the junior corpsman survive untouched when the senior corpsman and a lance corporal did not? Why was 1 Marine left in the low ground while she worked the others? The question wasn't asked out of cruelty. It was asked out of paperwork, which is its own kind of cruelty because it doesn't even know it's being cruel. So a few months after she came home, after the deployment ended and the unit rotated back to 29 Palms, Sofia Aguilar found herself sitting across a table from an investigating officer she'd never met, a major with a folder and a pen who was tasked with understanding the death of Lance Corporal Thomas Riggs. And the major, doing his job, looked at her and asked the question that took everything Reyes had built into her and turned it inside out. He asked, in the gentle, careful language of an inquiry, why she had not treated Riggs. She told him. She told him about the clock and the count. She told him junctional hemorrhage, no tourniquet reaches, 11 minutes on the bird, 3 savable men bleeding in the time it would take to maybe not save 1. She laid the whole brutal arithmetic on the table the way Reyes had taught her, and the major wrote it down, and he was not unkind, but she watched his face while she said it, and she saw the thing that has haunted her worse than the wash itself. She saw him hear it as a justification, as a defense, as the explanation of a person who'd done something that needed explaining. And something in Sofia Aguilar, the part that had been holding the line since the rotor wash, broke quietly right there at that table, because she had done it right. She knew she'd done it right. Reyes knew it, had known it with his own dying eyes. Riggs had known it and thanked her for it. And now a clean room and a folder and a well-meaning major were asking her to prove that saving 5 men instead of 1 was not a thing she needed forgiveness for. She stopped sleeping. She'd hear the air brakes that weren't there. She'd be awake at 2 in the morning with the coffee going out of an old reflex, waiting up for people who were never coming home, and she'd see the boy's face looking at the white sky, and she'd hear him say thank you, and she could not for the life of her decide whether that thank you was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her, or the heaviest thing anyone had ever laid on her back. Both. It was both. That's the thing about the worst gifts. They're always both. The inquiry cleared her. Of course it cleared her. There was nothing to clear. She performed her duty to a standard most corpsmen never have to find inside themselves. The Major's final report used the words exemplary triage under fire. But a finding on a page doesn't reach the place the wound actually is, any more than a tourniquet reaches a junctional bleed. The paper said exemplary. The nights said you left him. And for a long time, the nights were louder. Now here's the part where the Marine Corps, which gets a lot of things wrong, got one thing exactly right, and it came from a direction nobody expected. The men she saved did not let it lie. Sergeant Doyle, the thigh wound, the squad leader, he got himself walking again on a leg that still carried her tourniquet story in the scar, and when he heard there'd been an inquiry, when he heard somebody had made Sofia Aguilar sit at a table and explain why she was alive, he started making phone calls. Then he started driving. He tracked down Hutchins and Ruiz and Okafor and Briggs. The 5 of them scattered across the country by then, some still in, some out, and he told them what he'd learned, and not one of them hesitated. They wrote statements. Not the dry kind. The kind that says I watched this woman make a choice no human being should have to make, and she made it. And I am breathing today because she had the strength to walk past a dying man to get to me. And if anyone in this man's Marine Corps thinks that deserves a question mark instead of a medal, they can come say it to my face. And they did more than right. Doyle, who had a corporal's stubbornness even with sergeant stripes, started a campaign, quiet and relentless, to get Sofia Aguilar recognized properly, not for surviving, but for the thing she actually did. He pulled the radio logs. He timed it out. 11 minutes. 7 down. He got a flight surgeon to put it in clinical language so the metal board couldn't wave it off, the language that said the decedent's wound was, by current standards of care, very likely non-survivable in a pre-hospital setting, and that the corpsman's triage decision directly preserved 5 lives that were survivable. He built, brick by brick, the report that should have been written in the first place. The one with the truth in it. It took 2 years. These things always do. But on a Tuesday in 2021, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sofia Aguilar stood in a hangar at 29 Palms, while a citation was read aloud that finally said it out loud. It described the ambush. It described the 7 casualties. It described, in the flat official language that somehow lands harder than poetry, a corpsman who, with a senior medical authority mortally wounded, assumed control of the casualty collection point and through decisive triage and continuous treatment under direct enemy fire preserved the lives of 5 Marines. And then it said the sentence that finally let her start to breathe. It said that her decision to forego treatment of a Marine with a non-survivable wound, in order to treat those who could be saved, reflected the highest standard of her profession and the gravest courage a corpsman can be asked to show. The gravest courage. Somebody finally wrote it down. The courage to be right when right costs you a piece of your own soul. They pinned a bronze star with a combat V on her that day. And every one of the 5 men she saved was in that hangar. Doyle stood in the front row on his scarred leg. And in the 3rd row, with no uniform because he'd gotten out, sat a broad young man who had been a private named Hutchins, the whistling chest, the chest seal she'd torn open with her teeth, and he wept openly the whole time and did not care who saw. But here's the thing about a medal, friend. A medal closes a file. It doesn't close a wound. Sofia took the Bronze Star home and put it in a drawer, because the citation, as right as it finally got, still couldn't say the last true thing. It couldn't say that a 19-year-old boy from Dayton had looked up at her from the dirt and thanked her for leaving him. That sentence will never appear in any official document, because there is no official place to put it. And so she carried it alone for 3 more years, the way you carry the things that are too big and too holy and too heavy to hand to anybody else. Until a Memorial Day in San Diego, when somebody asked her to read the names of the fallen, and she said yes without thinking, the way you say yes to things before you understand what they'll ask of you. And that's where we came in. Dress whites. The wind off the harbor. A program shaking in her left hand. A microphone catching the silence before it caught her voice. And the name she could not say, the name 3 lines down the page, Thomas Riggs, Dayton, Ohio, 19 years old, the boy she walked past 4 times and stayed with at the end, the boy who thanked her. She stood at that podium for 4 full seconds in a silence 1,000 people could feel without understanding, and the world dissolved, and she was back in the wash, on her knees, with the rotor wash screaming and her hand on a gray cheek. And then a man stood up in the 3rd row. It was Hutchins, the whistling chest, the chest seal. Grown now, a sergeant's stripes on the arm of a uniform he put back on just for this day, and he walked up the side aisle without anyone asking him to, and he stopped at the foot of the stage, and he looked up at the woman who'd torn a wrapper open with her teeth so he could keep breathing, and he did the only thing that could have reached her across that distance. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Slow. The way you nod at somebody who pulled you out of a place you were never supposed to leave. The way Riggs had been too far gone to nod. So Hutchins nodded for him, for all of them, the living standing in for the dead. And Sofia Aguilar found the name on the page. And she said it. Thomas Riggs. She said it clear, and she said it whole. And then she did the thing she'd never let herself do at any inquiry, or any hangar, or any sleepless 2 in the morning. She told him the truth. She lowered the program, and she told 1,000 strangers about a dry riverbed and 11 minutes, and 7 men, and about a teacher who pointed her down the wash with his dying eyes, and about a boy who didn't scream so she could work, and about the last word that boy ever said. She told them he thanked her. She told them she had spent 5 years not knowing if she'd earned it. And she told them she finally understood, standing there in the wind, that Thomas Riggs hadn't thanked her for saving him. He thanked her for the only thing she could give him, which was the truth, and her hand on his face, and a witness who stayed awake with him at the end the way she'd promised herself at 9 years old she always would, so that nobody she loved ever came home or left alone. So let me leave you with this, friend, because I've kept you a long while and you've stayed, and that means you understand something about the cost of staying. We hand out our honors for the running and the rescuing, the brave we know how to look at. But the greatest courage isn't always loud, and it isn't always rewarded with a man pulled living out of the fire. Sometimes it's a 26-year-old corpseman doing the cruelest math in the world with her bare hands, and getting it right, and carrying the weight of being right for the rest of her life. Sometimes it's a 19-year-old boy choosing to die quiet, so for other men's mothers don't have to bury anybody. Sometimes the bravest thing a person ever does is the thing no medal can hold, the thing you can only honor by telling the story true, and staying awake to hear it. Sofia Aguilar finished reading the names that day. All of them. And when she stepped down from the podium, the 5 men she saved were waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, and so was the family of Thomas Riggs, who had driven out from Dayton, and who had never known until that morning that their boy died with a hand on his face, and a friend at his side, and a thank you on his lips. His mother held Sofia for a long time, and did not let go, and that holding on, was the only citation that ever really reached the wound. Somebody was awake when he came home. She kept the deal. She always keeps the deal. That's the story. Now go call somebody you'd walk through fire for, and tell them you're awake. Tell them you'll be awake when they get home. It's a small thing. Hold on to it. It's the only thing we've got that the math can't take.